Hi, my name is Laszlo Shomi. I'm a senior program manager on the team's engineering team. Today, I will walk you through the Implement Your Upgrade Approach session, which is part of the Upgrading from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams series of sessions. As always, you can follow me along using the Upgrade Planning Workbook, which you can download at akms/Upgrade Success Kit. Upgrade workshops, there are 4 of them. We start out under Plan Your Upgrade with the organizational pieces, the important information you must have to kick off this project and track your project success. Ready Your End Users, I will keep referring to this session as one of the most important one, is design the user's readiness strategy to help you users love and adopt Teams. The 2 technical sessions, identifying your upgrade approach, is about picking the right path for your organizations with various starting points, various tips and tricks. Today, implement your upgrade approach. I will be focusing on implementing both online and on-premises, without voice, with voice scenarios. What are the steps, in what order you need to execute for a successful upgrade? By the end of today's session, I hope you will recognize the upgrade settings in your Office 365 tenant admin portal. Hope you will understand the technical tips and considerations for a successful upgrade, and you will be able to apply these settings in your portal. I will cover them both in slides as well as in slideware. Familiar slide, if you have attended the previous session, Teams is more than a technical migration. This is what the Ready Your End Users is such an important session. I focus on the technical pieces, which is fall under the far right column, and we cover the other 3 columns in depth in the end user session. Quick summary from the previous session, identify your upgrade approach. All these scenarios we're discussing today, our common starting point is Skype for Business or link server, on premises or online. The endpoint is always Teams. Unless I call out specifically, anything we say and do apply to both on premises and online. Driving your adoption is key to your success. You cannot ignore the adoption challenges. You will see today that upgrading a user is really quick. You apply a policy and the user is upgraded to Teams. With a few lines of PowerShell, a whole organization can be migrated to Teams. But we want to make sure the users are ready for this change before you move them forward. Some key consideration, picking your path, the feature requirements, overlapping capabilities, or select capabilities method. You have to make a decision, you're going to move all users at once or in cohorts. We talked about the ramifications of triggering interrupt scenarios when some users in your organizations are using Teams only while others still in Skype for Business, and what those look like. You need to make a decision around how fast you're going to move your organization from Skype for Business to Teams. The 2 methods, one is side-by-side with overlapping capabilities method. We introduce Teams side-by-side to Skype for Business with all its features. In this scenario, Teams is intra-tenant focused, so all external communication, federation, PST, and PAT still comes to Skype for Business. But Teams capabilities inside the tenant, all available. It's a full experience for the users. They can also schedule meetings inviting external users or participants to a meeting. You drive your adoption program and you upgrade your users all at once or cohorts at the time to Teams. Side-by-side with select capabilities method is our other choice. You introduce Teams side-by-side to Skype for Business with collaborative features only. So Teams and channels, line of business application, application platform is all available. There is no overlapping capabilities there. When you're ready, you move meetings to Office 365 to Teams. So this scenario is more targeted for on-premises organizations. And you could start your journey here as well. You drive your adoption program and you upgrade all the users or one cohort at the time to be using Teams only. Let's talk about the possible paths for coexistence modes. I created this table to illustrate. We talked about the two journeys, overlapping capabilities and select capabilities method. These journeys aligns to modes which are set on the tenant or on the user, which will drive the capabilities. So first, let's get the pointer going here. First, you can look at the modes in more details at AKMS modes. We talk about the modes, we talk about the chat and calling behavior, where meeting scheduling happens, wherever Teams channels are available or not, and some recommended use. So islands mode, this is the default experience for the users. If you don't do anything but assign licensing to the users, they will have islands mode deployed. Chats and calls in either client. Chats and calls are remain in Skype talks to Skype and Teams talk to Teams. So there is no interoperability when both users are in this mode. Meeting scheduling, you can schedule meetings both in using the Skype for Business add-in in Outlook, or you can use the Teams meeting add-in in Outlook, or schedule a meeting in Teams, internally and externally. And Teams and channels are, of course, available. This is overlapping capabilities method. This is our default, and this is the starting point for all tenants, unless an IT pro like yourself would make a change to a tenant or to a user. The following three modes here, Skype for Business with Teams Collab, Skype for Business with Teams Collab and Meeting, and Skype for Business only, all aligned to the select capabilities method. Again, Skype for Business with Teams Collab. Chats and calls remain in Skype for Business. Skype for Business is the user's only chat and call capable application. Meeting scheduling is also Skype for Business for the users in this scenario, but Teams and channels are available for them. This is the first step in the select capabilities method deployment. Skype for Business with Teams Collab and Meetings. Chats and calls are available in Skype for Business. Meeting scheduling move to Teams, and Teams and channels application platform all available in Teams, of course. Second step in the select capabilities method. Skype for Business only is a special scenario for those users who do not going to get licensed for Teams, but we want to make sure that routing works well for these users. So assigning this mode, chats and calls remain in Skype for Business. Meeting scheduling remains in Skype for Business for the users. They don't have Teams and channels. Also aligned to select capabilities method. End of the road for all users is Teams only. This is where we want to get to from both overlapping and select capabilities method. It requires the user Skype for Business account to be homed online. That's so that user can communicate to other on-premises users in the organization who have not moved to Teams only yet. Chats and calls, of course, the only client they can send and receive chats and calls from is Teams. Meeting scheduling is in Teams, and Teams and channels, of course, are available. This is the final state for either path, and just for a reminder here, as of 1st of September 2019, all new tenants are in this mode by default. If you are just starting your journey from Skype for Business or Link server on premises to Teams, and you don't have a tenant yet, you need to acquire a tenant first, then open a support case to enable coexistence capabilities for your organization. Let's talk about prerequisites. Azure AD Connect is one of the most critical one here. You need to have this enabled, and it's not unique to Teams. Identities from your on-premises environment must be synced to Office 365. And we want to focus on here that all attributes need to be synced to Office 365. Microsoft Teams relies on MSRTC SIP attributes from your on-premises environment to figure it out how to route between teams through the Skype for Business online architecture to on-premises, or know where the user is in Skype for Business or not. And you have to enable Azure AD Connect prior to licensing the users for Teams. You could create user objects manually, but of course, it is not going to work in this scenario. So the process is acquiring tenant, enabling Azure AD Connect to sync your Active Directory. MSRT CPC attributes are the most critical one for Teams, and then you can license Teams for the users. Managing coexistence. Strictly speaking, coexistence between on-premises Skype for Business to Teams or to Skype for Business Online is not required, but all scenarios for a successful upgrade requires that this feature is enabled. So all the scenarios we're going to talk about today will require that you establish hybrid Skype for Business architecture between your online infrastructure to on-premises. Let's talk about the prerequisites here, or considerations for a Skype for Business online organizations. Unless you are pure online organization, you must have the MSRTC SIP attributes synchronized between on-premises and your Active Directory online. You, of course, also need to license the users. All the e-licenses include Teams with them. Plus, you need to pick phone system licenses as applicable in your organization. You need to meet prerequisites for access. 2 subnets and 4 ports, strictly speaking, what you need to open through your firewall. But in addition to, just like for any other Office 365 service, you need to open the ports up to Office 365, not only for Teams, but Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, authentication, all the other services you consume from Office 365, a user must be able to reach. You should also follow Microsoft networking best practices. It is a cloud architecture. The users must be able to get to the cloud. And just as with Skype for Business, real-time communication protocols are meant to be real-time. Proxies, VPNs, slowing this connectivity down and introduces errors, latency in the communication. Real-time communication requires that the users have the most optimal path from their device to the cloud. And we provide a lot of really good guidance there. I provided the link, AKMS Teams Networking. If you follow those principles and configuration items, your users will have excellent quality meetings and calls using Teams. All right, let's talk about some non-voice scenarios here we're gonna cover. We're gonna talk through Skype for Business Online to Teams, all users at once. So we're gonna start simple here, and we're gonna cover non-voice scenarios first. Then we're gonna use the same Skype for Business Online to Teams using cohorts, how we're gonna execute that. Then we're gonna talk about Skype for Business to Teams from on-premises environment, all users at once, and the same using cohorts. Okay, we will cover voice scenarios, but we start simple first without voice scenarios. All right, let's implement overlapping capabilities method for Skype for Business Online users and all users at once. Our starting point that users are pure online or synced with Azure AD, and you don't have a deployment or Skype for Business on premises. Let's enable the users. First, we're gonna assign them some licenses. And same time, we're gonna deploy clients to the users so they can access Teams eventually. We can also notify them in Skype for Business organization-wide from the tenant admin portal or from using PowerShell. They get the notification, as we talked about in the Identify Your Upgrade approach session, that Teams is available for them. You drive your adoption change management program, no skipping there. When you're ready to deploy cut over to Teams, you make an organizational-wide change from Islands mode, Teams only. You can do this in PowerShell also. And an optional step here is start the meeting migration service for the users. I provide an example, start CS EX meeting migration. When you make this change organization-wide, meeting migration service does not trigger for the user. You need to trigger it manually from PowerShell for each user. Same scenario using cohorts. Our starting point is exactly the same. Azure AD Sync established, no deployment of Skype for Business on premises. You enable the users, and enablement you can always do ahead of that time. Users are not fully cut over to Teams yet. So you license them, you deploy the client for the users you are targeting in that cohort. You notify them based on their user ID. So the notification settings in the admin portal is user-based this time, or you can script it from PowerShell. You drive your adoption change management program, and you can upgrade the users in the tenant admin portal by multi-selecting up to about 20 of them at the time. And you can also trigger meeting migration service at the same time, or you grant them the policy from PowerShell, and in that scenario, you still need to trigger meeting migration service manually for the user. What it looks like in the tenant admin portal, let's look at it. Under organizational wide settings, Teams upgrade, we can toggle the notification button for the users. This is organization wide. Ramifications of that is the bar in Skype for Business client, which says Teams is available for you. Go ahead and try it. When we're ready to migrate a user or an organization, we still organizational wide settings Teams upgrade. This time we are adjusting the coexistence mode from the default, which is Islands mode, aligns to our default approach. You can switch it to Teams only. Ramifications of that, all features light up in Teams internally and externally for the users. Again, if you are voice enabled, that's the only time the dial pad lights up in Teams. Skype for Business client gets the redirection, and the meeting only experience client. When you do settings, notifications again in the admin center organization-wide, when you do cohort, you can still notify the whole organization. When you migrate a user individually, you go to the user settings or you multi-select user, you're looking at the Teams upgrade settings, you edit it and change the organizational wide settings to Teams only. You will also get the choice here for meeting migration service at that time once you clearly selected. Let's skip here for a second and go to my tenant admin portal. Let me bring up a browser quickly. We're gonna go to portal.office.com. I'm gonna log into my favorite tenant here. And because I'm a tenant admin, I will get the admin console option here. I'm gonna launch it. And from there, I will go to the Teams admin center. This is just my preference to start it. You could also go directly to Teams admin center by going to admin.teams.microsoft.com. Let it come up. All right. Let's look at organizational wide settings first. Teams upgrade settings. So toggling the notification for the users and changing coexistence mode islands to Teams only. Would happen here for the users. This is organizational wide. When I make changes individually to users, I need to do that under users, when the link come up, let's look at my favorite user, Debbie here. Her Teams upgrade policy is set to use org-wide settings here. And I can change it from, if I deploy based on cohorts and I set a user experience to islands mode, I can do it manually here. Or I can switch it to Teams only. And you see, notice here, the migrate these users meetings to Teams settings get selected as well. And you can do this based on multiple users, just as the same way. Let's select Debbie here and a few other users, and you could edit their settings. And Teams upgrade policy, put them to Teams only, and meeting migration service selected by default. Apply the settings, and these 4 users in this scenario will get upgraded to a Teams only experience. All right, let's get back to the presentation. So we covered online. Let's look at on-premises organizations considerations first. We're going to migrate users in this scenario after we cover the prerequisites in both all users at once and in cohorts. But the prerequisites here, again, Azure AD is synchronized. The users can be in any of the Skype for Business online, Skype for Business modes, but not in Teams only. Teams only requires that the user Skype for Business account is moved online. So they could be in any of the Skype for Business mode. Skype for Business with Teams Collab, Skype for Business with Teams Collab and meetings. No change there. You just have to set it appropriately in this scenario. You need to meet the prerequisites for access, 2 subnets, 4 ports we talked about earlier. Follow the Microsoft networking best practices as we talked about earlier. And when you're ready to migrate a user, you can do this in a 1-step or 2-step migration, depending on what version of on-premises server you have. So 1-step migration works for Skype for Business Server 2019 or 2015 with CU8 or newer. You can use the move-cs user command with the move to Teams option. It will do 2 things. If you have an early version of link server and you don't do any updates or tips and tricks around it, I will help you with link server 2013 towards the end of the deck. You would have to do this in 2 steps. First, establish hybrid, of course. You use the move-cs user command to move the user to Skype for Business Online. And then you would use the grant CS team upgrade policy and upgrade the user to Teams. 1-step or 2-step doesn't matter. It goes to the same place. It does the same thing. The difference is that if you do it in 2 steps, you have to migrate or you have to monitor the progress of the PowerShell script to move-cs user before you can execute the grant-cs team upgrade policy for the user. And it has some timing implications. Right, so let's implement select capabilities method for an on-premises organization without enterprise voice. And we're gonna do migrate all users at once. So our starting point, Azure AD is synchronized. Users are homed on Skype for Business on-premises. No enterprise voice enabled for the users. Let's enable the users. We can and should do this ahead of a time. Assign the licenses for the users. Notify tenant-wide the users that Teams is available for them. You can do this from PowerShell or you can do this from the tenant admin console. You can also monitor progress of provisioning by using get-cs online user and monitor the interpreted user type. So interpreted user type initially going to be hybrid on-prem SFB user needs provisioning. Once provisioning completed, license assignment, checking MSRTC CP attributes for the user, the interpreted user type will be hybrid on-prem SFB user. Okay. This clearly tells Users Skype for Business Online, that the user has an on-premises Skype for Business account, which also tells Teams that the user has a Skype for Business account on premises. And deploy the Teams client, of course, for your users. Again, you can and should do this ahead of a time. You drive your adoption program for your users, and when you're ready, you make the change. Perform a single step move from on-premises to online and to Teams directly. Once this provisioning happens, post-provisioning, the Teams client will pick up from the middle tier a change that the user, the Grant CS team upgrade policy applied for the user, and they will restart the client and they will be in the Teams only mode. Very straightforward for the user. And as you see, the technical pieces of this is pretty straightforward and pretty easy for the users, pretty easy for the IT pro to execute. Users need to be ready for this change. That's why we put so much emphasis on adoption change management for the users. Same scenario using cohorts. Our starting point is exactly the same. We assign the appropriate licenses for the users. We notify them. In this scenario, I notify them organizational wide because my cohort is going to follow each other rapidly. I can monitor my provisioning looking at the interpreted user type, and I deploy the client based on the cohort or all users at once, and their upgrade will happen at a separate time frame. Single step move or two-step move, depending on what version of on-premises server environment you have. Post-provisioning, Team client will pick up from the middle tier that Teams is available for them in a Teams only mode. This change, when you move a user from on-premises or online, our experience, our target is it will take about 4 hours to move a user and all these change to take place. Azure AD has to synchronize, the middle tier has to update, Teams client need to pick up this change. So generally, we see about a 4-hour period. In some extreme cases, it takes more than 24 hours. You should open a support case in that scenario. All right, let's move on. So what about enterprise voice? We covered online and on-premises, non-voice scenarios so far. So let's talk about enterprise voice a little bit here. And we start out by talking through what are the voice options online and on-premises. Skype for Business Online has 2 voice options natively and online. One is Microsoft calling plans, where Microsoft is your telephony provider, or you deployed Cloud Connector Edition or CCE, where you connect a Skype for Business Online user to an on-premises voice topology. It runs on a virtualized environment. We had partners who provided equipment for this. It connects an on-premises SIP trunk to the user's Office 365 account. On-premises, you have 2 configuration options here. One is you deployed full enterprise voice using Skype for Business server environment, or you may be in a hybrid environment. On-premises configuration hybrid, you might have heard this as OPCH. This is the scenario where an on-premises Skype for Business or link server environment supporting Skype for Business online users. Okay, it's a very important distinction here. We will talk more about OPCH coming up. In Teams, you have 2 voice options. One is Microsoft Calling Plan. If you live in one of the 12 countries where we support Microsoft Calling Plan, Microsoft can be your telephony provider. Thereby, you don't need any equipment on premises or any additional contracts outside of the one with Microsoft. You could deploy direct routing. Direct routing is a technology where we connect a Teams user to an on-premises telephony provider through a session border controller. So session border controller terminates 2 trunks. One is going to Teams in Office 365. and the other trunks going to your telephony provider who's providing you the phone numbers. You negotiate the contracts with them, they give you this connectivity, and you host the session border controller and make it live for Teams users. Direct routing can also be deployed directly from a telephony provider. Thereby, you don't have any on-premises equipment in your environment. You negotiate with them, they manage the equipment for you, but you don't have to have anything on premises. Migration-wise, Microsoft Calling Plan from Skype for Business Online to Microsoft Calling Plan in Teams, no migration needed. You assign the upgrade policy for the user, and Teams voice is just going to work. No additional changes needed. User just have to pick a different client, Teams client, to make calls with. Second option, when you use Cloud Connector Edition, you could port the numbers to a Microsoft Calling Plan. Okay, or you could deploy direct routing. Cloud Connector Edition scenarios generally were deployed with a session border controller already in place. So you would have the equipment most likely already. You can establish a second trunk. Instead of pointing to the Skype for Business mediation server, it points to Microsoft Teams. And when you migrate the user to a Teams-only experience, you make a routing decision on the SBC to route inbound, outbound a particular number to Office 365. From on-premises, exactly the same two options exist. If you live in one of the 12 countries where we support it, you could migrate to Microsoft Calling Plan, or you need to deploy direct routing. The choices are exactly the same. The journey steps you need to execute may differ in each of these scenarios. All right, let's talk through a few voice scenarios here. Again, we're going to start simple. We're going to start with Skype for Business Online. Then we're going to look at on-premises scenarios. And also, I will have a few slides around Link Server 2013. It's important to cover that as well, as we have a lot of customers with that technology deployed. What we're not going to cover is number porting. Go to AKMS number porting. It's pretty well understood and documented process. Follow those steps, please. All right, let's kick it off. Let's kick it off again. Overlapping capabilities matter for online users. If you recall the slide earlier, when it says no voice here, this is exactly the same slide. Just to prove the point that by applying the policy, there is nothing special needed for the IT pro to execute to migrate voice services for this particular user to Office 365 or in Office 365 to Teams. Assign the license, deploy the client based on cohorts or all users at once. You notify them, you drive your adoption change management program. And when you're ready to switch the users over, you make it in PowerShell, all organization-wide, you execute islands mode to Teams change for the users. Same scenario with Cloud Connector Edition for the users. So our starting point is a little bit different. We have Azure AD synchronized, no deployment of Skype for Business on premises, but you have a Cloud Connector Edition service on premises deployed. Let's enable the users. And the enablement is always something you can and should do ahead of time. You assign the license to the users, you deploy the clients for the users. Then you have to make a decision what you're going to do with your Cloud Connector Edition. Are you going to configure direct routing? If you choose direct routing, you add a second trunk to your session border controller. You can change some number routing to Teams and test it out ahead of time, of course, and we encourage you to do that. Or, I'm sorry, or you're going to port numbers to Microsoft phone system. And number porting will create some outage. Work with Microsoft, it can be narrowed down to, I think the smallest window at the moment is 4-hour period when the number will be switched over. Okay, beyond that is the same. Notify the users Teams is available. You drive your adoption change management program. When you're ready to move the users, you make the tenant-wide or cohort-based change from islands mode to Teams only. Don't forget about meeting migration service. And at the same time, you either port the numbers to Microsoft calling plan, or you make a routing change on your session border controller for the numbers you are moving users for. Voicemail, just for completeness, we migrated on the back end to Azure Voicemail Exchange migration. You can look at the detail that AKMS EXUM should not be needed for CCA scenario, but for reference, I included the link here. It's a very useful link to take a look at. All right. Undoubtedly, the most complex scenario we have here, it's from on-premises with enterprise voice to direct routing. Let's look at the starting point. Azure AD is synchronized. You have a hybrid split domain in place, which is a requirement for Skype for Business on-premises. Use any of the coexistence modes for the users online except Teams only. Okay. Users are enabled on-premises with a DID number, and the number is assigned to them. So on-premises environment with DID numbers are enabled. Let's enable the users. You assign them licenses, plus the appropriate phone system licenses, of course. You can monitor all this using get CS online user, the interpreted user type we talked about earlier. You verify, again, using CS online user that enterprise voicemail and hosted enterprise voice and hosted voicemail is enabled for the user, should be enabled by default. You configure your online voice routing policies. Okay, there are scripts available which you can use to export on-premises voice routing policies, reshape them, and import them into Office 365. Is the exact same structure we had on-premises with Skype for Business Server. Verify that you assigned a voice routing policy for the users. And you can, again, and should do all this ahead of a time. Few days in advance, few weeks in advance, just to test it out, everything is working in your environment. Then when you're ready to enable the user, here are the changes you need to do. When you move the users to Teams only experience, you need to make a change on your SBC to route the numbers through direct routing to Teams in Office 365, inbound and outbound calls. And at the same time, upgrade the users, one-step or two-step move -CS user, move to Teams, or move-CS user, move them to Skype for Business Online, then move them forward with the right Teams only policy. From the middle tier, once the change is made to Teams only, the Teams client will pick up this change, restart, and their user is back in business using Teams as their telephony provider. Pretty straightforward. Again, don't forget about the timing of all this, that you should execute this off hours because it will take up to 4 hours to move the user online, and apply the appropriate settings for the Teams client and Teams client to pick up that change from the middle tier. Call queues and auto entrant then on the next generation calling platform. Microsoft has already migrated on the backend to the new NGC backend, which supports only Teams clients. So Skype for Business client is not supported when using direct routing. Only Teams clients are supported with direct routing. User must be in Teams only mode for the dial pad to light up in the Teams client for the user. All right, what about Link Server 2013? I have 2 really detailed slides here with a lot of words, but let's walk through slowly. In general, we do not require on-prem Edge server to be updated to Skype for Business Server 2015 in order to support interop and hybrid scenarios with direct routing, without direct routing. All will work just fine with 2013, once you establish hybrid, of course. We support hybrid topology with Link 2013 agent director, unless OPCH is configured. On-premises configured hybrid is the scenario when a Skype for Business online user using on-premises voice services. If you don't have OPCH, therefore you don't have Skype for Business online users using on-premises voice services, you don't need to upgrade your Edge server and next hop pool to be 2015. I have more about this scenario in the next slide. That said, we made significant improvements performance-wise in 2015 Edge and 2015 Director roles. And think of the scenario that you are a large organization and you migrate users gradually to Teams. At some point, 50% of your users will be using Teams only as their only UC client, and 50% of the users will be still on premises using Skype for Business. All that traffic between these users will go through the Edge topology and this hybrid configuration between online to on premises. So you may benefit from it to upgrade your Edge topology for this increased traffic during your transition, even though you have not deployed OPCH. But all interrupt scenarios we're talking about, Teams user online with their Skype for Business account, homed online, talking to another Link Server 2013 user on premises will work if you don't use OPCH through the 2013 topology. So what about OPCH? OPCH has some specific requirements for versions to be deployed. Use AKMS SFBO hybrid voice to get all those details. And OPCH does require that the Edge server and next hop pool to be a 2015 pool. Otherwise, the backend services where the users are located, the users pool can still be 2013. Again, pay attention that two-step migration will have timing implication. You need to monitor when that move-cs user command has completed. But you have a saving grace here. You can deploy a one-step migration option by installing SFB Server 2015 CU8 Plus administrative workstation. Matter of fact, you can deploy several of them to have a parallel move from several workstations at the same time when you move users in bulk to Teams. And of course, because you have the administrative workstation involved, you can run a one-step move to Teams and to Office 365, move-cs user, move to Teams from those workstations. Again, pay attention to the timing. Timing implications still apply regardless how many workstations you're running this from. All right, let's talk about devices a little bit. Third-party IP phones, what you may have deployed with your Skype for Business deployment, will keep working. We retire Skype for Business Online, 31st of July, 2021. These devices will keep working 2 years longer, 31st of July, 2023, but they will not have advanced features like call POC, shared line appearance, group call pickup working. But the device itself through a gateway will still work with the Teams backend client. OAuth 2.0 firmware, we had a deadline mid-January. This is now extended to 7/15/2020. So you have a few more months to deploy OAuth 2 updates to these hardware devices. Management of this third-party IP phone is still happening through the third-party solutions, generally the manufacturer who manufactures those devices. If you deploy Teams devices, you can manage them through the Teams Admin Center. If you had Attendant Console, either the 2013 version or you have deployed a third-party solution, those need to be updated to a Teams compatible client as well. We are working with vendors to provide solutions for attended console. Please work with your existing vendor and look for, do they have a Teams equivalent version of it when you're ready to update, but you need to update those clients as well. Room system devices. Coexistence must have no impact on room system devices. A room system device can log into both Teams and Skype for Business meetings just as well. At some point, when the users who are using that device have been migrated to a Teams-only experience, you will want to upgrade the experience on this room system device to be Teams-only as well. If you have deployed cloud video interrupt in your organization, please connect with your cloud video and our provider that your configuration is still correct for Teams. All right, where do you go from here? Today we talked about that user adoption is critical regardless the path you take. I kept reiterating that, and in all migration scenario, driving your adoption change management was a key success factor. Skype for Business online organizations can move to Teams just by applying the Teams upgrade policy. It will work for the users, the voice scenario as well. If you have deployed Cloud Connector Edition, you may have to migrate it to direct routing or Microsoft calling plan. But for the backend, from the Skype for Business to Teams point of view, is still just a quick policy change. There are two paths for voice scenarios: port the number to Microsoft calling plan or deploy direct routing. These are the only two ways you can connect voice services to Teams. And you can also move from older Skype for Business or Link server in a one-step or two-step migration to Teams. I provided you with a quick workaround for Link Server 2013 by deploying a 2015 administrative workstation so you can move forward in a one-step move. You will save some significant amount of time with it. Pay attention to the edge requirement as we talked about with 2013. As a next step, again, Upgrade Success Kit is your friend. Download it, use it. Not only the upgrade planning workbook, but we provide a lot of other useful tools. We're referring to them in the other sessions as well. Start building your project team, define your scope and timeline, pick an upgrade journey you're gonna follow with, or work with your users, what best works for them. All our online documentation is, of course, updated to all these processes we talk about, and we point to the online links on the documentation side from this presentation and from the upgrade planning workbook as well. You can sign up for additional trainings at Skype for Business to Teams planning, Skype to Teams planning. This was Implement Your Upgrade Approach session. Hopefully you already attended the Plan Your Upgrade or the Identify Your Upgrade Approach session. And again, don't forget about your end users. Right? I am done with this presentation today. I want to thank you for coming to this session. Hopefully all the tips and tricks and tools we provide you as parts of this upgrade session, we make your life easier when upgrading from Skype for Business to Teams. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in future sessions.